It was 16 years ago that America would face one of its greatest catastrophic events that would leave it on its knees. What was this catastrophic event, you may ask? It was the economic downturn of the 2008 financial recession. In the 2000s, speculators and investors in the US and abroad were looking for low risk and high return investments. These speculators ended up choosing the American housing market as their main investment, as they believed they could get a better return from the interest rates for mortgages than they could from other safe investments, such as US Treasury bonds. Specifically, they invested in mortgage-backed securities.
These securities were sold to investors around the world. Many investors assumed these securities were trustworthy and asked few questions about their actual value. Two of the leading purchasers of mortgage-backed securities were Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Because these companies were chartered by Congress, many believed they were guaranteed by the federal government. This allowed them to borrow enormous sums of money, fuel the market for questionable investments, and put our financial system at risk.
However, investors wanted more mortgages. They wanted more money, and there were only so many qualified borrowers. And so, lenders such as banks would begin to loosen restrictions and begin to lend to people with poor credit and low income. This was the birth of the subprime mortgage. This led to a vicious cycle. As more people wanted more investment opportunities, less restrictions were put on mortgage lending, and more high-risk mortgages were issued. The bubble grew even larger as these tax lending strategies and low interest rates ballooned housing markets, making them seem like even better investments for the investors. More and more people would invest. Eventually, the ballooning housing market caught up with low-income borrowers. Their low interest payments had ended, and now had no way to keep up with their ever-growing mortgage, and they began defaulting on their loans. This would start a domino effect, as bigger and bigger corporations, such as banks and investment firms, would begin to bleed and fail, spreading the economic downturn to all corners of the American economy, launching us into a recession. Almost immediately, companies faced large financial strains and had to cut costs, resulting in widespread layoffs. The housing market witnessed a sharp decline in property values, leaving many homeowners with underwater mortgages. Both of these factors would leave many jobless and homeless, handicapping an entire generation for years to come. At the same time, governments were scrambling to stabilize their economies in vain, as the 2008 recession ravaged the economy. This experience would forever change the perspective towards debt of the American people, as the experience of job losses, foreclosures, and economic uncertainty led to a more cautious approach to spending and borrowing, along with a general distrust of the government and big banks, which prevailed to this day.
The force of government support was not comprehensive or quick enough to withstand the acute pressure brought on by a weakening economy. And the spectacle of huge amounts of taxpayer assistance provided to the same institutions that helped cause the crisis added to public distrust.
These lasting events have had some major impacts on America as a working society. The typical age for Americans to retire was 59 in 2002. Although this may seem like a late time for someone to retire, 20 years later in 2022, the age increased to 61. A 2-year increase in just 20 years is such a substantial increase. It was also expected to rise to 66 in that same year, and currently the age is 67 due to these lasting effects of this crisis. This occurrence has been due to many people not wanting to retire. This can either be because they may feel as though they may not be in the right place mentally or physically to retire, or more importantly, because they simply can't because they know that they won't be able to flourish economically outside of employment. Furthermore, through this lack of economic stability over a long period of time, there has been a massive loss of jobs in the country. This has a strong correlation with the amount of unemployed people here in the U.S. During the recession, money became so scarce that companies and big corporations had to lay off many of their employees. And due to the decreasing demand of goods and services, many of these places couldn't raise prices for these things. Additionally, it was reported that the labor force participation rate fell tremendously after the financial crisis in 2008, and in the year 2013, the data showed no signs of reverting back to normal.
By the time I took office, the economy was shrinking by an annual rate of more than 8%. Our businesses were shedding 800,000 jobs each month. It was a perfect storm that would rob millions of Americans of jobs and homes and savings that they had worked a lifetime to build. And it also laid bare the long erosion of a middle class that for more than a decade has had to work harder and harder just to keep up.
After going through these conflicts, America, specifically its banks, has been finding ways to crack down on this situation. Due to the fact that this financial crisis ultimately began through the lending of money, banks have been imposing stricter guidelines on people who are seeking to be lent money. Regulations like having a certain credit score or even having a specific income make sure that the banks know not only who can be able to take out money, but also how much money that person is eligible to take out. Through these close examinations of potential loanees, the banks are able to make sure that another crisis like the 2008 recession does not occur again.